Dabney dead, Hooven dead, Harron dead, Annixter dead, Broderson dead, Osterman dying, S. Behrman alive, successful. The railroad in possession of Quien-Sabe. I saw them shot. Not 12 hours since I stood there at the irrigating ditch. Ah, that terrible moment of horror and confusion. Powder smoke, flashing pistol barrels, blood stains, rearing horses, men staggering to their death, Christian in a horrible posture, one rigid leg high in the air across his saddle, Broderson falling sideways into the ditch, Osterman laying himself down, his head on his arms as if tired out. These things, I have seen them. The picture of this day's work is from henceforth part of my mind, part of me. They have done it. S. Behrman and the owners of the railroad have done it, while all the world looked on, while the people of these United States looked on. Oh, come now and try your theories upon us of the ranches, us who have suffered, us who know. Oh, talk to us now of the rights of capital. Talk to us of the trust. Talk to us of the equilibrium between the classes. Try your ingenious ideas upon us. We know. I cannot tell whether or not your theories are excellent. I do not know if your ideas are plausible. I do not know how practical is your scheme of society. I do not know if the railroad has a right to our lands, but I do know that Harron is dead, that Annixter is dead, that Broderson is dead, that Hooven is dead, that Osterman is dying, and that S. Behrman is alive, successful, triumphant, that he has ridden into possession of a principality over the dead bodies of 5 men shot down by his hired associates. I can see the outcome. The railroad will prevail. The trust will overpower us. Here in this corner of a great nation, here on the edge of the continent, here in this valley of the West, far from the great centers, isolated, remote, lost, the great iron hand crushes life from us, crushes liberty and the pursuit of happiness from us, and our little struggles, our moment's convulsion of death agony causes not one jar in the vast clashing machinery of the nation's life. A fleck of grit in the wheels, perhaps a grain of sand in the cogs, the momentary creak of the axle is the mother's wail of bereavement, the wife's cry of anguish. And the great wheel turns, spinning smooth again, even again, and the tiny impediment of a second, scarce noticed, is forgotten. Make the people believe that the faint tremor in their great engine is a menace to its function. What a folly to think of it! Tell them of the danger, and they will laugh at you. Tell them, 5 years from now, the story of the fight between the League of the San Joaquin and the railroad, and it will not be believed. What? A pitched battle between farmer and railroad? A battle that cost the lives of 7 men? Impossible. It could not have happened. Your story is fiction, is exaggerated. Yes, it is Lexington. God help us, God enlighten us. God rouse us from our lethargy. It is Lexington. Farmers with guns in their hands fighting for liberty. Is the state of California the only one that has its ancient and hereditary foe? Are there no other trusts between the oceans than this of the Pacific and Southwestern Railroad? Ask yourselves, you of the Middle West. Ask yourselves, you of the North. Ask yourselves, you of the East. Ask yourselves, you of the South. Ask yourselves, every citizen of every state from Maine to Mexico, from the Dakotas to the Carolinas. Have you not the monster in your boundaries? If there is not a trust of transportation, it is only another head of the same hydra. Is not our death struggle typical? Is it not one of many? Is it not symbolical of the great and terrible conflict that is going on everywhere in these United States? Ah, you people, blind, bound, tricked, betrayed, can you not see it? Can you not see how the monsters have plundered your treasures, and holding them in the grip of their iron claws, dole them out to you only at the price of your blood, at the price of the lives of your wives and your little children? You give your babies to Moloch for the loaf of bread you have kneaded yourselves. You offer your starved wives to Juggernaut for the iron rail you have yourselves compounded. He spent the night over his journal, writing down such thoughts as these, or walking the floor from wall to wall, or seized at times with unreasoning horror and blind rage, flinging himself downward upon his bed, vowing with inarticulate cries that neither S. Behrman nor Shelgrim should ever live to consummate their triumph. Morning came, and with it the daily papers and news. Presley did not even glance at the Mercury. Bonneville published 2 other daily journals that professed to voice the will and reflect the temper of the people, and these he read eagerly. Osterman was yet alive, and there were chances of his recovery. The League, some 300 of its members, had gathered at Bonneville overnight and were patrolling the streets, and, still resolved to keep the peace, were even guarding the railroad shops and buildings. Furthermore, the Leaguers had issued manifestos urging all citizens to preserve law and order, yet summoning an indignation meeting to be convened that afternoon at the City Opera House. It appeared from the newspapers that those who obstructed the marshal in the discharge of his duty could be proceeded against by the district attorney on information or by bringing the matter before the grand jury. But the grand jury was not at that time in session, and it was known that there were no funds in the marshal's office to pay expenses for the summoning of jurors or the serving of processes. S. Behrman and Ruggles, in interviews, stated that the railroad withdrew entirely from the fight. The matter now, according to them, was between the Leaguers and the United States government. They washed their hands of the whole business. The ranchers could settle with Washington. But it seemed that Congress had recently forbidden the use of troops for civil purposes. The whole matter of the League railroad contest was evidently for the moment to be left in statu quo. But to Presley's mind, the most important piece of news that morning was the report of the action of the railroad upon hearing of the battle. Instantly, Bonneville had been isolated. Not a single local train was running, not one of the through trains made any halt at the station. The mails were not moved. Further than this, by some arrangement difficult to understand, the telegraph operators at Bonneville and Guadalajara, acting under orders, refused to receive any telegrams except those emanating from railway officials. The story of the fight, the story creating the first impression, was to be told to San Francisco and the outside world by S. Behrman, Ruggles, and the local P&SW agents. An hour before breakfast, the undertakers arrived and took charge of the bodies of Heron and Annixter. Presley saw neither Hilma, Magnus, nor Mrs. Derrick. The doctor came to look after Hilma. He breakfasted with Mrs. Dyke and Presley, and from him Presley learned that Hilma would recover both from the shock of her husband's death and from her miscarriage of the previous night. "She ought to have her mother with her," said the physician. "She does nothing but call for her or beg to be allowed to go to her. I have tried to get a wire through to Mrs. Tree, but the company will not take it. And even if I could get word to her, how could she get down here? There are no trains." But Presley found that it was impossible for him to stay at Los Muertos that day. Gloom and the shadow of tragedy brooded heavy over the place. A great silence pervaded everything, a silence broken only by the subdued coming and going of the undertaker and his assistants. When Presley, having resolved to go into Bonneville, came out through the doorway of the house, he found the undertaker tying a long strip of crape to the bell handle. Presley saddled his pony and rode into town. By this time, after long hours of continued reflection upon one subject, a somber, brooding malevolence, a deep-seated desire of revenge, had grown big within his mind. The first numbness had passed off. Familiarity with what had been done had blunted the edge of horror, and now the impulse of retaliation prevailed. At first, the sullen anger of defeat, the sense of outrage, had only smoldered, but the more he brooded, the fiercer flamed his rage. Sudden paroxysms of wrath gripped him by the throat. Abrupt outbursts of fury injected his eyes with blood. He ground his teeth, his mouth filled with curses, his hands clenched till they grew white and bloodless. Was the railroad to triumph then in the end? After all those months of preparation, after all those grandiloquent resolutions, after all the arrogant presumption of the League. The League, what a farce! What had it amounted to when the crisis came? Was the trust to crush them all so easily? Was S. Behrman to swallow Los Muertos? S. Behrman. Presley saw him plainly, huge, rotund, white. Saw his jowl, tremulous and obese, the roll of fat over his collar sprinkled with sparse hairs, the great stomach with its brown linen vest and heavy watch chain of hollow links clinking against the buttons of imitation pearl. And this man was to crush Magnus Derrick, had already stamped the life from such men as Heron and Annixter. This man, in the name of the trust, was to grab Los Muertos as he had grabbed Quien and after Los Muertos, Broderson's ranch, then Osterman's, then others, and still others, the whole valley, the whole state. Presley beat his forehead with his clenched fist as he rode on. "No," he cried, "no, kill him, kill him, kill him with my hands." The idea of it put him beside himself. Oh, to sink his fingers deep into the white, fat throat of the man, to clutch like iron into the great puffed jowl of him, to wrench out the life, to batter it out, strangle it out, to pay him back for the long years of extortion and oppression, to square accounts for bribed jurors, bought judges, corrupted legislatures, to have justice for the trick of the Ranchers' Railroad Commission, the charlatanism of the 10% cut, the ruin of Dyke, the seizure of Quien the murder of Herron, the assassination of Annixter. It was in such mood that he reached Carraher's. The saloon-keeper had just opened his place and was standing in his doorway smoking his pipe. Presley dismounted and went in, and the two had a long talk. When, 3 hours later, Presley came out of the saloon and rode on toward Bonneville, his face was very pale, his lips shut tight, resolute, determined. His manner was that of a man whose mind is made up. The hour for the mass meeting at the Opera House had been set for 1 o'clock, but long before noon the street in front of the building, and in fact all the streets in its vicinity, were packed from side to side, with a shifting, struggling, surging, and excited multitude. There were few women in the throng, but hardly a single male inhabitant of either Bonneville or Guadalajara was absent. Men had even come from Visalia and Pixley. It was no longer the crowd of curiosity-seekers that had thronged around Hooven's place by the irrigating ditch. The people were no longer confused, bewildered. A full realization of just what had been done the day before was clear now in the minds of all. Business was suspended. Nearly all the stores were closed. Since early morning the members of the League had put in an appearance and rode from point to point, their rifles across their saddle pommels. Then, by 10 o'clock, the streets had begun to fill up. The groups on the corners grew and merged into one another. Pedestrians, unable to find room on the sidewalks, took to the streets. Hourly the crowd increased, till shoulders touched and elbows, till free circulation became impeded, then congested, then impossible. The crowd, a solid mass, was wedged tight from storefront to storefront. And from all this throng, this single unit, this living, breathing organism, the people, there rose a droning, terrible note. It was not yet the wild, fierce clamor of riot and insurrection, shrill, high-pitched, but it was a beginning, the growl of the awakened brute, feeling the iron in its flank, heaving up its head with bared teeth, the throat vibrating to the long, indrawn snarl of wrath. Thus the forenoon passed, while the people, their bulk growing hourly vaster, kept to the streets, moving slowly backward and forward, oscillating in the grooves of the thoroughfares, the steady, low-pitched growl rising continually into the hot, still air. Then, at length, about 12 o'clock, the movement of the throng assumed definite direction. It set toward the Opera House. Presley, who had left his pony at the city livery stable, found himself caught in the current and carried slowly forward in its direction. His arms were pinioned to his sides by the press. The crush against his body was all but rib-cracking. He could hardly draw his breath. All around him rose and fell wave after wave of faces, hundreds upon hundreds, thousands upon thousands, red, lowering, sullen. All were set in one direction, and slowly, slowly they advanced, crowding closer till they almost touched one another. For reasons that were inexplicable, great tumultuous heavings like ground swells of an incoming tide surged over and through the multitude. At times Presley, lifted from his feet, was swept back with the crowd, till the entrance of the Opera House was half a block away. Then the returning billow beat back again and swung him along, gasping, staggering, clutching, till he was landed once more in the vortex of frantic action in front of the foyer. Here the waves were shorter, quicker. The crushing pressure on all sides of his body left him without strength to utter the cry that rose to his lips. Then suddenly the whole mass of struggling, stamping, fighting, writhing men about him seemed, as it were, to rise, to lift, multitudinous, swelling, gigantic. A mighty rush dashed Presley forward in its leap. There was a moment's whirl of confused sights, congested faces, opened mouths, bloodshot eyes, clutching hands. A moment's outburst of furious sound, shouts, cheers, oaths. A moment's jam where Presley veritably believed his ribs must snap like pipe stems, and he was carried, dazed, breathless, helpless, an atom on the crest of a storm-driven wave, up the steps of the Opera House, on into the vestibule, through the doors, and at last into the auditorium of the house itself. There was a mad rush for places. Men, disdaining the aisle, stepped from one orchestra chair to another, striding over the backs of seats, leaving the print of dusty feet upon the red plush cushions. In a twinkling the house was filled from stage to topmost gallery. The aisles were packed solid. Even on the edge of the stage itself men were sitting, a black fringe on either side of the footlights. The curtain was up, disclosing a half-set scene, the flats leaning at perilous angles that represented some sort of terrace, the pavement alternate squares of black and white marble, while red, white, and yellow flowers were represented as growing from urns and vases. A long double row of chairs stretched across the scene from wing to wing, flanking a table covered with a red cloth, on which was set a pitcher of water and a speaker's gavel. Promptly these chairs were filled up with members of the League, the audience cheering as certain well-known figures made their appearance. Garnett of the Ruby Rancho, Gethings of the San Pablo, Keast of the ranch of the same name, Chattern of the Bonanza, elderly men, bearded, slow of speech, deliberate. Garnett opened the meeting. His speech was plain, straightforward, matter-of-fact. He simply told what had happened. He announced that certain resolutions were to be drawn up. He introduced the next speaker. This one pleaded for moderation. He was conservative. All along he had opposed the idea of armed resistance except as the very last resort. He deplored the terrible affair of yesterday. He begged the people to wait in patience, to attempt no more violence. He informed them that armed guards of the League were, at that moment, patrolling Los Muertos, Broderson's, and Osterman's. It was well known that the United States Marshal confessed himself powerless to serve the writs. There would be no more bloodshed. We have had, he continued, bloodshed enough, and I want to say right here that I am not so sure but what yesterday's terrible affair might have been avoided. A gentleman whom we all esteem, who from the first has been our recognized leader, is, at this moment, mourning the loss of a young son, killed before his eyes. God knows that I sympathize, as do we all, in the affliction of our President. I am sorry for him. My heart goes out to him in this hour of distress, but at the same time the position of the League must be defined. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to the people of this county. The League armed for the very purpose of preserving the peace, not of breaking it. We believed that with 600 armed and drilled men at our disposal, ready to muster at a moment's call, we could so overawe any attempt to expel us from our lands that such an attempt would not be made until the cases pending before the Supreme Court had been decided. If, when the enemy appeared in our midst yesterday, they had been met by 600 rifles, it is not conceivable that the issue would have been forced. No fight would have ensued, and today we would not have to mourn the deaths of 4 of our fellow citizens. A mistake has been made, and we of the League must not be held responsible. The speaker sat down amidst loud applause from the leaders and less pronounced demonstrations on the part of the audience. A second leaguer took his place, a tall, clumsy man, half rancher, half politician. "I want to second what my colleague has just said," he began. This matter of resisting the marshal when he tried to put the railroad dummies in possession of the ranches around here was all talked over in the committee meetings of the League long ago. It never was our intention to fire a single shot. No such absolute authority as was assumed yesterday was delegated to anybody. Our esteemed president is all right, but we all know that he is a man who loves authority and who likes to go his own gait without accounting to anybody. We, the rest of us Leaguers, never were informed as to what was going on. We supposed, of course, that watch was being kept on the railroad so as we wouldn't be taken by surprise as we were yesterday. And it seems no watch was kept at all, or if there was, it was mighty ineffective. Our idea was to forestall any movement on the part of the railroad, and then, when we knew the marshal was coming down, to call a meeting of our executive committee and decide as to what should be done. We ought to have had time to call out the whole league. Instead of that, what happens? While we're all off chasing rabbits, the railroad is allowed to steal a march on us, and when it is too late, a handful of Leaguers is got together, and a fight is precipitated, and our men killed. I'm sorry for our president, too. No one is more so. But I want to put myself on record as believing he did a hasty and inconsiderate thing. If he had managed right, he could have had 600 men to oppose the railroad, and there would not have been any gunfight or any killing. He didn't manage right, and there was a killing, and I don't see as how the League ought to be held responsible. The idea of the League, the whole reason why it was organized, was to protect all the ranches of this valley from the railroad, and it looks to me as if the lives of our fellow citizens had been sacrificed, not in defending all of our ranches, but just in defense of one of them, Los Muertos, the one that Mr. Derrick owns. The speaker had no more than regained his seat when a man was seen pushing his way from the back of the stage toward Garnett. He handed the rancher a note, at the same time whispering in his ear. Garnett read the note, then came forward to the edge of the stage, holding up his hand. When the audience had fallen silent, he said, "I have just received sad news. Our friend and fellow citizen, Mr. Osterman, died this morning between 11 and 12 o'clock." Instantly there was a roar. Every man in the building rose to his feet, shouting, gesticulating. The roar increased. The opera house trembled to it. The gas jets and the lighted chandeliers vibrated to it. It was a raucous howl of execration, a bellow of rage, inarticulate, deafening. A tornado of confusion swept whirling from wall to wall, and the madness of the moment seized irresistibly upon Presley. He forgot himself. He no longer was master of his emotions or his impulses. All at once he found himself upon the stage, facing the audience, flaming with excitement, his imagination on fire, his arms uplifted in fierce, wild gestures, words leaping to his mind in a torrent that could not be withheld. "One more dead," he cried, "one more. Harron dead, Annixter dead, Broderson dead, Dabney dead, Osterman dead, Hooven dead. Shot down, killed in the defense of their homes, killed in the defense of their rights, killed for the sake of liberty. How long must it go on? How long must we suffer? Where is the end? What is the end? How long must the iron-hearted monster feed on our life's blood? How long must this terror of steam and steel ride upon our necks? Will you never be satisfied? Will you never relent, you, our masters, you, our lords, you, our kings, you, our taskmasters, you, our pharaohs? Will you never listen to that command, 'Let my people go'? Oh, that cry ringing down the ages! Hear it, hear it! It is the voice of the Lord God speaking in his prophets. Hear it, hear it! Let my people go! Ramses heard it in his pylons at Thebes. Caesar heard it on the Palatine. The Bourbon Louis heard it at Versailles. Charles Stuart heard it at Whitehall. The White Tsar heard it in the Kremlin. Let my people go! It is the cry of the nations, the great voice of the centuries. Everywhere it is raised. The voice of God is the voice of the people. The people cry out, "Let us, the people, God's people, go." You, our masters, you, our kings, you, our tyrants, don't you hear us? Don't you hear God speaking in us? Will you never let us go? How long at length will you abuse our patience? How long will you drive us? How long will you harass us? Will nothing daunt you? Does nothing check you? Do you not know that to ignore our cry too long is to wake the Red Terror? Ramses refused to listen to it and perished miserably. Caesar refused to listen and was stabbed in the Senate House. The Bourbon Louis refused to listen and died on the guillotine. Charles Stuart refused to listen and died on the block. The White Tsar refused to listen and was blown up in his own capital. Will you let it come to that? Will you drive us to it? We who boast of our land of freedom, we who live in the country of liberty? Go on as you have begun, and it will come to that. Turn a deaf ear to that cry of "Let my people go" too long, and another cry will be raised that you cannot choose but hear, a cry that you cannot shut out. It will be the cry of the man on the street, the "À la Bastille," that wakes the Red Terror and unleashes revolution. Harassed, plundered, exasperated, desperate, the people will turn at last as they have turned so many, many times before. You, our lords, you, our taskmasters, you, our kings. You have caught your Samson. You have made his strength your own. You have shorn his head. You have put out his eyes. You have set him to turn your millstones, to grind the grist for your mills. You have made him a shame and a mock. Take care, oh, as you love your lives, take care, lest some day, calling upon the Lord his God, he reach not out his arms for the pillars of your temples. The audience, at first bewildered, confused by this unexpected invective, suddenly took fire at his last words. There was a roar of applause. Then, more significant than mere vociferation, Presley's listeners, as he began to speak again, grew suddenly silent. His next sentences were uttered in the midst of a profound stillness. They own us, these taskmasters of ours. They own our homes. They own our legislatures. We cannot escape from them. There is no redress. We are told we can defeat them by the ballot box. They own the ballot box. We are told that we must look to the courts for redress. They own the courts. We know them for what they are: ruffians in politics, ruffians in finance, ruffians in law, ruffians in trade, bribers, swindlers, and tricksters. No outrage too great to daunt them, no petty larceny too small to shame them. Despoiling a government treasury of $1 million, yet picking the pockets of a farmhand of the price of a loaf of bread. They swindle a nation of 100 million and call it financiering. They levy a blackmail and call it commerce. They corrupt a legislature and call it politics. They bribe a judge and call it law. They hire blacklegs to carry out their plans and call it organization. They prostitute the honor of a state and call it competition. And this is America. We fought Lexington to free ourselves. We fought Gettysburg to free others. Yet the yoke remains. We have only shifted it to the other shoulder. We talk of liberty. Oh, the farce of it! Oh, the folly of it! We tell ourselves and teach our children that we have achieved liberty, that we no longer need fight for it. Why, the fight is just beginning, and so long as our conception of liberty remains as it is today, it will continue. For we conceive of liberty in the statues we raise to her as a beautiful woman, crowned, victorious, in bright armor and white robes, a light in her uplifted hand, a serene, calm, conquering goddess. Oh, the farce of it! Oh, the folly of it! Liberty is not a crowned goddess, beautiful in spotless garments, victorious, supreme. Liberty is the man in the street, a terrible figure, rushing through powder smoke, fouled with the mud and ordure of the gutter, bloody, rampant, brutal, yelling curses, in one hand a smoking rifle, in the other a blazing torch. Freedom is not given free to any who ask. Liberty is not born of the gods. She is a child of the people, born in the very height and heat of battle, born from death, stained with blood, grimed with powder. And she grows to be not a goddess, but a fury, a fearful figure, slaying friend and foe alike, raging, insatiable, merciless, the Red Terror. Presley ceased speaking. Weak, shaking, scarcely knowing what he was about, he descended from the stage. A prolonged explosion of applause followed, the opera house roaring to the roof, men cheering, stamping, waving their hats. But it was not intelligent applause. Instinctively, as he had made his way out, Presley knew that, after all, he had not once held the hearts of his audience. He had talked as he would have written. For all his scorn of literature, he had been literary. The men who listened to him, ranchers, country people, storekeepers, attentive though they were not once sympathetic. Vaguely they had felt that here was something which other men, more educated, would possibly consider eloquent. They applauded vociferously but perfunctorily, in order to appear to understand. Presley, for all his love of the people, saw clearly for one moment that he was an outsider to their minds. He had not helped them nor their cause in the least. He never would. Disappointed, bewildered, ashamed, he made his way slowly from the opera house and stood on the steps outside, thoughtful, his head bent. He had failed, thus he told himself. In that moment of crisis, that at the time he believed had been an inspiration, he had failed. The people would not consider him, would not believe that he could do them service. Then suddenly he seemed to remember. The resolute set of his lips returned once more. Pushing his way through the crowded streets, he went on toward the stable where he had left his pony. Meanwhile, in the Opera House, a great commotion had occurred. Magnus Derrick had appeared. Only a sense of enormous responsibility, of gravest duty, could have prevailed upon Magnus to have left his house and the dead body of his son that day. But he was the president of the League, and never since its organization had a meeting of such importance as this one been held. He had been in command at the irrigating ditch the day before. It was he who had gathered the handful of Leaguers together. It was he who must bear the responsibility of the fight. When he had entered the Opera House, making his way down the central aisle toward the stage, a loud disturbance had broken out, partly applause, partly a meaningless uproar. Many had pressed forward to shake his hand, but others were not found wanting who, formerly his staunch supporters, now scenting opposition in the air, held back, hesitating, afraid to compromise themselves by adhering to the fortunes of a man whose actions might be discredited by the very organization of which he was the head. Declining to take the chair of presiding officer which Garnett offered him, the governor withdrew to an angle of the stage, where he was joined by Keast. This one, still unalterably devoted to Magnus, acquainted him briefly with the tenor of the speeches that had been made. "I am ashamed of them, Governor," he protested indignantly, "to lose their nerve now, to fail you now. It makes my blood boil. If you had succeeded yesterday, if all had gone well, do you think we would have heard of any talk of assumption of authority, or acting without advice and consent? As if there was any time to call a meeting of the executive committee. If you hadn't acted as you did, the whole county would have been grabbed up by the railroad. Get up, Governor, and bring 'em all up standing. Just tear 'em all to pieces. Show 'em that you are the head, the boss. That's what they need. That killing yesterday has shaken the nerve clean out of them." For the instant the governor was taken all aback. What, his lieutenants were failing him? What, he was to be questioned, interpolated upon yesterday's irrepressible conflict? Had disaffection appeared in the ranks of the League, at this of all moments? He put from him his terrible grief. The cause was in danger. At the instant he was the president of the League only, the chief, the master. A royal anger surged within him, a wide, towering scorn of opposition. He would crush this disaffection in its incipiency, would vindicate himself and strengthen the cause at one and the same time. He stepped forward and stood in the speaker's place, turning partly toward the audience, partly toward the assembled Leaguers. "Gentlemen of the League," he began, "citizens of Bonneville." But at once the silence in which the governor had begun to speak was broken by a shout. It was as though his words had furnished a signal. In a certain quarter of the gallery, directly opposite, a man arose, and in a voice partly of derision, partly of defiance, cried out, "How about the bribery of those 2 delegates at Sacramento? Tell us about that. That's what we want to hear about." A great confusion broke out. The first cry was repeated not only by the original speaker, but by a whole group of which he was but a part. Others in the audience, however, seeing in the disturbance only the clamor of a few railroad supporters, attempted to howl them down, hissing vigorously and exclaiming, "Put 'em out! Put 'em out!" "Order! Order!" called Garnett, pounding with his gavel. The whole Opera House was in an uproar. But the interruption of the governor's speech was evidently not unpremeditated. It began to look like a deliberate and planned attack. Persistently, doggedly, the group in the gallery vociferated. "Tell us how you bribed the delegates at Sacramento. Before you throw mud at the railroad, let's see if you are clean yourself. Put 'em out! Put 'em out!" Briber, Magnus Derrick, unconvicted briber. Put him out. Keast, beside himself with anger, pushed down the aisle underneath where the recalcitrant group had its place, and shaking his fist called up at them, "You were paid to break up this meeting. If you have anything to say, you will be afforded the opportunity. But if you do not let the gentleman proceed, the police will be called upon to put you out." But at this, the man who had raised the first shout leaned over the balcony rail, and, his face flaming with wrath, shouted, "Yeah, talk to me of your police. Look out we don't call on them first to arrest your president for bribery. You and your howl about law and justice and corruption. Here, he turned to the audience, read about him. Read the story of how the Sacramento Convention was bought by Magnus Derrick, president of the San Joaquin League. Here's the facts printed and proved. With the words, he stooped down and from under his seat dragged forth a great package of extra editions of the Bonneville Mercury, not an hour off the presses. Other equally large bundles of the paper appeared in the hands of the surrounding group. The strings were cut, and in handfuls and armfuls the papers were flung out over the heads of the audience underneath. The air was full of the flutter of the newly printed sheets. They swarmed over the rim of the gallery like clouds of monstrous winged insects, settling upon the heads and into the hands of the audience, were passed swiftly from man to man, and within 5 minutes of the first outbreak, everyone in the Opera House had read Genslinger's detailed and substantiated account of Magnus Derrick's deal with the political bosses of the Sacramento Convention. Genslinger, after pocketing the governor's hush money, had sold him out. Keast, one quiver of indignation, made his way back upon the stage. The Leaguers were in wild confusion. Half the assembly of them were on their feet, bewildered, shouting vaguely. From proscenium wall to foyer, the Opera House was a tumult of noise. The gleam of the thousands of the Mercury extras was like the flash of whitecaps on a troubled sea. Keast faced the audience. "Liars!" he shouted, striving with all the power of his voice to dominate the clamor. "Liars and slanderers! Your paper is the paid organ of the corporation. You have not one shadow of proof to back you up. Do you choose this, of all times, to heap your calumny upon the head of an honorable gentleman, already prostrated by your murder of his son? Proofs? We demand your proofs." "We've got the very assemblymen themselves," came back the answering shout. "Let Derrick speak. Where is he hiding? If this is a lie, let him deny it. Let him disprove the charge." "Derrick, Derrick," thundered the Opera House. Keast wheeled about. Where was Magnus? He was not in sight upon the stage. He had disappeared. Crowding through the throng of Leaguers, Keast got from off the stage into the wings. Here the crowd was no less dense. Nearly everyone had a copy of the Mercury. It was being read aloud to groups here and there, and once Keast overheard the words, "Say, I wonder if this is true after all." "Well, and even if it was," cried Keast, turning upon the speaker, "we should be the last ones to kick. In any case, it was done for our benefit. It elected the Ranchers' Commission." "A lot of benefit we got out of the Ranchers' Commission," retorted the other. "And then," protested a third speaker, "that ain't the way to do, if he did do it, bribing legislatures. Why, we were bucking against corrupt politics. We couldn't afford to be corrupt." Keast turned away with a gesture of impatience. He pushed his way farther on. At last, opening a small door in a hallway back of the stage, he came upon Magnus. The room was tiny. It was a dressing room. Only 2 nights before, it had been used by the leading actress of a comic opera troupe which had played for 3 nights at Bonneville. A tattered sofa and limping toilet table occupied a third of the space. The air was heavy with the smell of stale grease paint, ointments, sachet. Faded photographs of a young woman in tights and gauzes ornamented the mirror and the walls. Underneath the sofa was an old pair of corsets. The spangled skirt of a pink dress, turned inside out, hung against the wall. And in the midst of such environment, surrounded by an excited group of men who gesticulated and shouted in his very face, pale, alert, agitated, his thin lips pressed tightly together, stood Magnus Derrick. "Here," cried Keast as he entered, closing the door behind him. "Where's the governor? Here, Magnus, I've been looking for you. The crowd has gone wild out there. You've got to talk 'em down. Come out there and give those blacklegs the lie. They are saying you are hiding." But before Magnus could reply, Garnett turned to Keast. "Well, that's what we want him to do, and he won't do it." "Yes, yes," cried the half-dozen men who crowded around Magnus. "Yes, that's what we want him to do." Keast turned to Magnus. "Why, what's all this, Governor?" he exclaimed. "You've got to answer that. Hey, why don't you give 'em the lie?" I... Magnus loosened the collar about his throat. "It's a lie. I will not stoop. I would not. It would be beneath it would be beneath me." Keast stared in amazement. Was this the great man, the leader, indomitable, of Roman integrity, of Roman valor, before whose voice whole conventions had quailed? Was it possible he was afraid to face those hired vilifiers? "Well, how about this?" demanded Garnett suddenly. "It is a lie, isn't it? That commission was elected honestly, wasn't it?" "How dare you, sir?" Magnus burst out. "How dare you question me, call me to account?" "Please understand, sir, that I tolerate—" "Oh, quit it!" cried a voice from the group. "You can't scare us, Derek. That sort of talk was well enough once, but it don't go any more. We want a yes or no answer." It was gone, that old-time power of mastery, that faculty of command. The ground crumbled beneath his feet. Long since it had been, by his own hand, undermined. Authority was gone. Why keep up this miserable sham any longer? Could they not read the lie in his face, in his voice? What a folly to maintain the wretched pretense! He had failed. He was ruined. Harron was gone. His ranch would soon go. His money was gone. Lyman was worse than dead. His own honor had been prostituted. Gone, gone, everything he held dear. Gone, lost, and swept away in that fierce struggle. And suddenly, and all in a moment, the last remaining shells of the fabric of his being, the sham that had stood already wonderfully long, cracked and collapsed. Was the commission honestly elected? Insisted Garnett. Were the delegates? Did you bribe the delegates? We were obliged to shut our eyes to means, faltered Magnus. There was no other way to... Then suddenly, and with the last dregs of his resolution, he concluded with, "Yes, I gave them $2,000 each." "Oh, hell! Oh, my God!" exclaimed Keast, sitting swiftly down upon the ragged sofa. There was a long silence. A sense of poignant embarrassment descended upon those present. No one knew what to say or where to look. Garnett, with a labored attempt at nonchalance, murmured, "I see. Well, that's what I was trying to get at. Yes, I see." "Well," said Gettings at length, bestirring himself, "I guess I'll go home." There was a movement. The group broke up, the men making for the door. One by one they went out. The last to go was Keast. He came up to Magnus and shook the governor's limp hand. "Goodbye, Governor," he said. "I'll see you again pretty soon. Don't let this discourage you. They'll come around all right after a while. So long." He went out, shutting the door. And seated in the one chair of the room, Magnus Derrick remained a long time, looking at his face in the cracked mirror that for so many years had reflected the painted faces of soubrettes in this atmosphere of stale perfume and moldy rice powder. It had come, his fall, his ruin. After so many years of integrity and honest battle, his life had ended here, in an actress's dressing room, deserted by his friends, his son murdered, his dishonesty known, an old man, broken, discarded, discredited, and abandoned. Before nightfall of that day, Bonneville was further excited by an astonishing bit of news. S. Behrman lived in a detached house at some distance from the town, surrounded by a grove of live oak and eucalyptus trees. At a little after 6:30, as he was sitting down to his supper, a bomb was thrown through the window of his dining room, exploding near the doorway leading into the hall. The room was wrecked, and nearly every window of the house shattered. By a miracle, S. Behrman himself remained untouched. Chapter 8. On a certain afternoon in the early part of July, about a month after the fight at the irrigating ditch and the mass meeting at Bonneville, Cedarquist, at the moment opening his mail in his office in San Francisco, was genuinely surprised to receive a visit from Presley. "Well, upon my word, Press," exclaimed the manufacturer, as the young man came in through the door that the office boy held open for him. "Upon my word, have you been sick? Sit down, my boy. Have a glass of sherry. I always keep a bottle here." Presley accepted the wine and sank into the depths of a great leather chair near by. "Sick?" he answered. "Yes, I have been sick. I'm sick now. I'm gone to pieces, sir." His manner was the extreme of listlessness, the listlessness of great fatigue. "Well, well," observed the other, "I'm right sorry to hear that. What's the trouble, Press?" Oh, nerves mostly, I suppose, and my head, and insomnia, and weakness, a general collapse all along the line, the doctor tells me. Over-cerebration, he says, over-excitement. Well, well, observed the other, I'm right sorry to hear that. What's the trouble, Press? Oh, nerves mostly, I suppose, and my head, and insomnia, and weakness, a general collapse all along the line, the doctor tells me. Over-cerebration, he says, over-excitement. I fancy I rather narrowly missed brain fever. Well, I can easily suppose it, answered Cedarquist gravely, after all you have been through. Presley closed his eyes. They were sunken in circles of dark brown flesh, and pressed a thin hand to the back of his head. It's a nightmare, he murmured, a frightful nightmare, and it's not over yet. You have heard of it all only through the newspaper reports. But down there at Bonneville, at Los Muertos, oh, you can have no idea of the misery caused by the defeat of the ranchers and by this decision of the Supreme Court that dispossesses them all. We had gone on hoping to the last that we would win there. We had thought that in the Supreme Court of the United States, at least, we could find justice. And the news of its decision was the worst, last blow of all. For Magnus, it was the last, positively the very last. Poor, poor Derrick, murmured Cedarquist. Tell me about him, Press. How does he take it? What is he going to do? It beggars him, sir. He sunk a great deal more than any of us believed in his ranch when he resolved to turn off most of the tenants and farm the ranch himself. Then the fight he made against the railroad in the courts, and the political campaign he went into to get Lyman on the Railroad Commission, took more of it. The money that Genslinger blackmailed him of, it seems, was about all he had left. He had been gambling, you know the governor, on another bonanza crop this year to recoup him. Well, the bonanza came right enough, just in time for S. Behrman and the railroad to grab it. Magnus is ruined. What a tragedy, murmured the other. Lyman turning rascal, Harron killed, and now this, and all within so short a time, all at the same time, you might almost say. If it had only killed him, continued Presley, but that is the worst of it. How the worst? I'm afraid, honestly, it is going to turn his wits, sir. It's broken him. Oh, you should see him. You should see him. A shambling, drooping, trembling old man, in his dotage already. He sits all day in the dining room, turning over papers, sorting them, tying them up, opening them again, forgetting them, all fumbling and mumbling and confused. And at the table sometimes he forgets to eat. And listen, you know from the house we can hear the trains whistling for the long trestle. As often as that happens, the governor seems to be, frightened. He will sink his head between his shoulders, as though he were dodging something, and he won't fetch a long breath again till the train is out of hearing. He seems to have conceived an abject, unreasoned terror of the railroad. But he will have to leave Los Muertos now, of course. Yes, they will all have to leave. They have a fortnight more. The few tenants that were still on Los Muertos are leaving. That is one thing that brings me to the city. The family of one of the men who was killed, Hooven was his name, have come to the city to find work. I think they are liable to be in great distress, unless they have been wonderfully lucky, and I am trying to find them in order to look after them. You need looking after yourself, Press. Oh, once away from Bonneville and the sight of the ruin there, I'm better. But I intend to go away. And that makes me think I came to ask you if you could help me, if you would let me take passage on one of your wheat ships. The doctor says an ocean voyage would set me up. Why, certainly, Press, declared Cedarquist. But I'm sorry you'll have to go. We expected to have you down in the country with us this winter. Presley shook his head. No, he answered, I must go. Even if I had all my health, I could not bring myself to stay in California just now. If you can introduce me to one of your captains. With pleasure. When do you want to go? You may have to wait a few weeks. Our first ship won't clear till the end of the month. That would do very well. Thank you, sir. But Cedarquist was still interested in the land troubles of the Bonneville farmers, and took the first occasion to ask. So the railroad are in possession on most of the ranches? On all of them, returned Presley. The League went all to pieces as soon as Magnus was forced to resign. The old story, they got quarreling among themselves. Somebody started a compromise party, and upon that issue a new president was elected. Then there were defections. The railroad offered to lease the lands in question to the ranchers who owned them, he exclaimed bitterly, and because the terms were nominal, almost nothing, plenty of the men took the chance of saving themselves. And, of course, once signing the lease, they acknowledged the railroad's title. But the road would not lease to Magnus. S. Behrman takes over Los Muertos in a few weeks now. No doubt the road made over their title in the property to him, observed Cedarquist, as a reward of his services. No doubt, murmured Presley wearily. He rose to go. By the way, said Cedarquist, what have you on hand for, let us say, Friday evening? Won't you dine with us then? The girls are going to the country Monday of next week, and you probably won't see them again for some time if you take that ocean voyage of yours. I'm afraid I shall be very poor company, sir, hazarded Presley. There's no go, no life in me at all these days. I am like a clock with a broken spring. Not broken, Press, my boy, urged the other, only run down. Try and see if we can't wind you up a bit. Say that we can expect you. We dine at 7. Thank you, sir. Till Friday at 7, then. Regaining the street, Presley sent his valise to his club, where he had engaged a room, by a messenger boy, and boarded a Castro Street car. Before leaving Bonneville, he had ascertained, by strenuous inquiry, Mrs. Hooven's address in the city, and thitherward he now directed his steps. When Presley had told Cedarquist that he was ill, that he was jaded, worn out, he had told only half the truth. Exhausted he was, nerveless, weak, but this apathy was still invaded from time to time with fierce incursions of a spirit of unrest and revolt, reactions, momentary returns of the blind, undirected energy that at one time had prompted him to a vast desire to acquit himself of some horrible deed of readjustment. Just what, he could not say. Some terrifying martyrdom, some awe-inspiring immolation, consummate, incisive, conclusive. He fancied himself to be fired with the purblind, mistaken heroism of the anarchist, hurling his victim to destruction with full knowledge that the catastrophe shall sweep him also into the vortex it creates. But his constitutional irresoluteness obstructed his path continually. Brain-sick, weak of will, emotional, timid even, he temporized, procrastinated, brooded, came to his decisions in the dark hours of the night, only to abandon them in the morning. Once only had he acted, and at this moment, as he was carried through the windy, squalid streets, he trembled at the remembrance of it. The horror of what might have been, incompatible with the vengeance whose minister he fancied he was, oppressed him. The scene perpetually reconstructed itself in his imagination. He saw himself under the shade of the encompassing trees and shrubbery, creeping on his belly towards the house in the suburbs of Bonneville, watching his chances, seizing opportunities, spying upon the lighted windows where the raised curtains afforded a view of the interior. Then had come the appearance in the glare of the gas of the figure of the man for whom he waited. He saw himself rise and run forward. He remembered the feel and weight in his hand of Caraher's bomb, the 6 inches of plugged gas pipe. His upraised arm shot forward. There was a shiver of smashed window panes, then a void, a red whirl of confusion, the air rent, the ground rocking, himself flung headlong, flung off the spinning circumference of things, out into a place of terror and vacancy and darkness. And then, after a long time, the return of reason, the consciousness that his feet were set upon the road to Los Muertos, and that he was fleeing, terror-stricken, gasping, all but insane with hysteria. Then the never-to-be-forgotten night that ensued, when he descended into the pit, horrified at what he supposed he had done, at one moment ridden with remorse, at another raging against his own feebleness, his lack of courage, his wretched, vacillating spirit. But morning had come, and with it the knowledge that he had failed, and the baser assurance that he was not even remotely suspected. His own escape had been no less miraculous than that of his enemy, and he had fallen on his knees in inarticulate prayer, weeping, pouring out his thanks to God for the deliverance from the gulf to the very brink of which his feet had been drawn. After this, however, there had come to Presley a deep-rooted suspicion that he was, of all human beings, the most wretched, a failure. Everything to which he had set his mind failed. His great epic, his efforts to help the people who surrounded him, even his attempted destruction of the enemy, all these had come to nothing. Girding his shattered strength together, he resolved upon one last attempt to live up to the best that was in him, and to that end he had set himself to lift out of the despair into which they had been thrust the bereaved family of the German, Houven. After all was over, and Houven, together with the 7 others who had fallen at the irrigating ditch, were buried in the Bonneville Cemetery, Mrs. Houven, asking no one's aid or advice, and taking with her Minna and little Hilda, had gone to San Francisco, had gone to find work, abandoning Los Muertos and her home forever. Presley only learned of the departure of the family after 15 days had elapsed. At once, however, the suspicion forced itself upon him that Mrs. Houven, and Minna too, for the matter of that, country-bred, ignorant of city ways, might easily come to grief in the hard, huge struggle of city life. This suspicion had swiftly hardened to a conviction, acting at last upon which Presley had followed them to San Francisco, bent upon finding and assisting them. The house to which Presley was led by the address in his memorandum book was a cheap but fairly decent hotel near the powerhouse of the Castro Street cable. He inquired for Mrs. Houven. The landlady recollected the Houvens perfectly. German woman with a little baby girl and an older daughter, sure. The older girl was main pretty. Sure, I remember them, but they ain't here no more. They left a week ago. I had to ask them for their room. As it was, they owed a week's room rent. Mister, I can't afford... Well, do you know where they went? Did you hear what address they had their trunk expressed to? Ah, yes, their trunk, vociferated the woman, clapping her hands to her hips, her face purpling. Their trunk, ah, sure, I got their trunk, and what are you going to do about it? I'm holding it till I get my money. What have you got to say about it? Let's hear it. Presley turned away with a gesture of discouragement, his heart sinking. On the street corner he stood for a long time, frowning in trouble and perplexity. His suspicions had been only too well founded. So long ago as a week the Houvens had exhausted all their little store of money. For 7 days now they had been without resources, unless, indeed, work had been found. And what, he asked himself, what work in God's name could they find to do here in the city? 7 days. He quailed at the thought of it. 7 days without money, knowing not a soul in all that swarming city. Ignorant of city life, as both Minna and her mother were, would they even realize that there were institutions built and generously endowed for just such as they? He knew them to have their share of pride, the dogged, sullen pride of the peasant. Even if they knew of charitable organizations, could they bring themselves to apply there? A poignant anxiety thrust itself sharply into Presley's heart. Where were they now? Where had they slept last night? Where breakfasted this morning? Had there even been any breakfast this morning? Had there even been any bed last night? Lost and forgotten in the plexus of the city's life, what had befallen them? Toward what fate was the ebb tide of the streets drifting them? Was this to be still another theme wrought out by iron hands upon the world-old, world-wide keynote? How far were the consequences of that dreadful day's work at the irrigating ditch to reach? To what length was the tentacle of the monster to extend? Presley returned toward the central, the business quarter of the city, alternately formulating and dismissing from his mind plan after plan for the finding and aiding of Mrs. Houven and her daughters. He reached Montgomery Street and turned toward his club, his imagination once more reviewing all the causes and circumstances of the great battle of which for the last 18 months he had been witness. All at once he paused, his eye caught by a sign affixed to the wall just inside the street entrance of a huge office building, and, smitten with an idea, stood for an instant motionless upon the sidewalk, his eyes wide, his fists shut tight. The building contained the general office of the Pacific and Southwestern Railroad. Large though it was, it nevertheless was not pretentious, and during his visits to the city Presley must have passed it, unheeding, many times. But for all that, it was the stronghold of the enemy, the center of all that vast ramifying system of arteries that drained the life-blood of the state, the nucleus of the web in which so many lives, so many fortunes, so many destinies had been enmeshed. From this place, so he told himself, had emanated that policy of extortion, oppression, and injustice that little by little had shouldered the ranchers from their rights, till, their backs to the wall, exasperated and despairing, they had turned and fought and died. From here had come the orders to S. Behrman, to Cyrus Ruggles, and to Genslinger, the orders that had brought Dyke to a prison, that had killed Annixter, that had ruined Magnus, that had corrupted Lyman. Here was the keep of the castle, and here, behind one of those many windows, in one of those many offices, his hand upon the levers of his mighty engine, sat the master, Shelgrim himself. Instantly, upon the realization of this fact, an ungovernable desire seized upon Presley, an inordinate curiosity. Why not see, face to face, the man whose power was so vast, whose will was so resistless, whose potency for evil so limitless, the man who for so long and so hopelessly they had all been fighting? By reputation he knew him to be approachable. Why should he not then approach him? Presley took his resolution in both hands. If he failed to act upon this impulse, he knew he would never act at all. His heart beating, his breath coming short, he entered the building, and in a few moments found himself seated in an ante-room, his eyes fixed with hypnotic intensity upon the frosted pane of an adjoining door, whereon in gold letters was inscribed the word President. In the end, Presley had been surprised to find that Shelgrim was still in. It was already very late, after 6 o'clock, and the other offices in the building were in the act of closing. Many of them were already deserted. At every instant, through the open door of the ante-room, he caught a glimpse of clerks, office boys, bookkeepers, and other employees hurrying toward the stairs and elevators, quitting business for the day. Shelgrim, it seemed, still remained at his desk, knowing no fatigue, requiring no leisure. "What time does Mr. Shelgrim usually go home?" inquired Presley of the young man who sat ruling forms at the table in the ante-room. "Anywhere between 6:30 and 7, the other answered, adding, "Very often he comes back in the evening." And the man was 70 years old. Presley could not repress a murmur of astonishment. Not only mentally, then, was the president of the P&SW a giant. 70 years of age, and still at his post, holding there with the energy, with a concentration of purpose that would have wrecked the health and impaired the mind of many men in the prime of their manhood. But in the next instant Presley set his teeth. "It is an ogre's vitality," he said to himself. "Just so is the man-eating tiger strong. The man should have energy who has sucked the life-blood from an entire people." A little electric bell on the wall near at hand trilled a warning. The young man who was ruling forms laid down his pen, and opening the door of the president's office, thrust in his head. Then, after a word exchanged with the unseen occupant of the room, he swung the door wide, saying to Presley, "Mr. Shelgrim will see you, sir." Presley entered a large, well-lighted, but singularly barren office. A well-worn carpet was on the floor, 2 steel engravings hung against the wall, an extra chair or two stood near a large, plain, littered table. That was absolutely all, unless he excepted the corner washstand, on which was set a pitcher of ice water covered with a clean, stiff napkin. A man, evidently some sort of manager's assistant, stood at the end of the table, leaning on the back of one of the chairs. Shelgrim himself sat at the table. He was large, almost to massiveness. An iron-gray beard and a mustache that completely hid the mouth covered the lower part of his face. His eyes were a pale blue and a little watery. Here and there upon his face were moth spots. But the enormous breadth of the shoulders was what, at first, most vividly forced itself upon Presley's notice. Never had he seen a broader man. The neck, however, seemed in a manner to have settled into the shoulders, and furthermore they were humped and rounded, as if to bear great responsibilities and great abuse. At the moment he was wearing a silk skull-cap, pushed to one side and a little awry, a frock-coat of broadcloth with long sleeves, and a waistcoat from the lower buttons of which the cloth was worn and upon the edges rubbed away, showing the metal underneath. At the top this waistcoat was unbuttoned, and in the shirt-front disclosed were 2 pearl studs. Presley, uninvited, unnoticed apparently, sat down. The assistant manager was in the act of making a report. His voice was not lowered, and Presley heard every word that was spoken. The report proved interesting. It concerned a bookkeeper in the office of the Auditor of Disbursements. It seems he was at most times thoroughly reliable, hard-working, industrious, ambitious. But at long intervals the vice of drunkenness seized upon the man, and for 3 days rode him like a hag. Not only during the period of this intemperance, but for the few days immediately following, the man was useless, his work untrustworthy. He was a family man, and earnestly strove to rid himself of his habit. He was, when sober, valuable. In consideration of these facts, he had been pardoned again and again. "You remember, Mr. Shelgrim," observed the manager, "that you have more than once interfered in his behalf, when we were disposed to let him go." "I don't think we can do anything with him, sir. He promises to reform continually, but it is the same old story. This last time we saw nothing of him for 4 days. Honestly, Mr. Shelgrim, I think we ought to let Tentell out. We can't afford to keep him. He is really losing us too much money. Here's the order ready now, if you care to let it go." There was a pause. Presley, all attention, listened breathlessly. The assistant manager laid before his president the typewritten order in question. The silence lengthened. In the hall outside, the wrought-iron door of the elevator cage slid to with a clash. Shelgrim did not look at the order. He turned his swivel chair about and faced the windows behind him, looking out with unseeing eyes. At last he spoke. "Tentell has a family, wife and 3 children. How much do we pay him?" 130. "Let's double that, or say 250. Let's see how that will do." "Why, of course, if you say so, but really, Mr. Shelgrim—" "Well, we'll try that anyhow." Presley had not time to readjust his perspective to this new point of view of the president of the P&S.W. before the assistant manager had withdrawn. Shelgrim wrote a few memoranda on his calendar pad and signed a couple of letters before turning his attention to Presley. At last he looked up and fixed the young man with a direct, grave glance. He did not smile. It was some time before he spoke. At last he said, "Well, sir?" Presley advanced and took a chair nearer at hand. Shelgrim turned and from his desk picked up and consulted Presley's card. Presley observed that he read without the use of glasses. "You," he said, again facing about, "you are the young man who wrote the poem called The Toilers." "Yes, sir." "It seems to have made a great deal of talk. I've read it, and I've seen the picture in Cedarquist's house, the picture you took the idea from." Presley, his senses never more alive, observed that, curiously enough, Shelgrim did not move his body. His arms moved, and his head, but the great bulk of the man remained immobile in its place, and as the interview proceeded and this peculiarity emphasized itself, Presley began to conceive the odd idea that Shelgrim had, as it were, placed his body in the chair to rest, while his head and brain and hands went on working independently. A saucer of shelled filbert stood near his elbow, and from time to time he picked up one of these in a great thumb and forefinger and put it between his teeth. "I've seen the picture called The Toilers," continued Shelgrim, "and of the two I like the picture better than the poem." "The picture is by a master," Presley hastened to interpose. "And for that reason," said Shelgrim, "it leaves nothing more to be said. You might just as well have kept quiet. There's only one best way to say anything, and what has made the picture of the Toilers great is that the artist said in it the best that could be said on the subject." "I had never looked at it in just that light," observed Presley. He was confused, all at sea, embarrassed. What he had expected to find in Shelgrim he could not have exactly said, but he had been prepared to come upon an ogre, a brute, a terrible man of blood and iron, and instead had discovered a sentimentalist and an art critic. No standards of measurement in his mental equipment would apply to the actual man, and it began to dawn upon him that possibly it was not because these standards were different in kind, but that they were lamentably deficient in size. He began to see that here was the man not only great, but large, many-sided, of vast sympathies, who understood with equal intelligence the human nature in an habitual drunkard, the ethics of a masterpiece of painting, and the financiering and operation of 10,000 miles of railroad. "I had never looked at it in just that light," repeated Presley. "There is a great deal in what you say." If I am to listen, continued Shelgrim, to that kind of talk, I prefer to listen to it first-hand. I would rather listen to what the great French painter has to say than what you have to say about what he has already said. His speech, loud and emphatic at first, when the idea of what he had to say was fresh in his mind, lapsed and lowered itself at the end of his sentences, as though he had already abandoned and lost interest in that thought, so that the concluding words were indistinct beneath the grey beard and moustache. Also, at times, there was the faintest suggestion of a lisp. I wrote that poem, hazarded Presley, at a time when I was terribly upset. I live, he concluded, or did live on the Los Muertos ranch in Tulare County, Magnus Derrick's ranch. The railroad's ranch leased to Mr. Derrick, observed Shelgrim. Presley spread out his hands with a helpless, resigned gesture. And, continued the president of the P&SW with grave intensity, looking at Presley keenly, I suppose you believe I am a grand old rascal. I believe, answered Presley, I am persuaded. He hesitated, searching for his words. Believe this, young man, exclaimed Shelgrim, laying a thick, powerful forefinger on the table to emphasize his words. Try to believe this, to begin with, that railroads build themselves. Where there is a demand, sooner or later there will be a supply. Mr. Derrick, does he grow his wheat? The wheat grows itself. What does he count for? Does he supply the force? What do I count for? Do I build the railroad? You are dealing with forces, young man, when you speak of wheat and the railroads, not with men. There is the wheat, the supply. It must be carried to feed the people. There is the demand. The wheat is one force, the railroad another, and there is the law that governs them, supply and demand. Men have only little to do in the whole business. Complications may arise, conditions that bear hard on the individual, crush him maybe, but the wheat will be carried to feed the people as inevitably as it will grow. If you want to fasten the blame of the affair at Los Muertos on any one person, you will make a mistake. Blame conditions, not men. But, faltered Presley, you are the head. You control the road. You are a very young man. Control the road. Can I stop it? I can go into bankruptcy if you like. But otherwise, if I run my road as a business proposition, I can do nothing. I cannot control it. It is a force born out of certain conditions, and no man can stop it or control it. Can your Mr. Derrick stop the wheat growing? He can burn his crop, or he can give it away, or sell it for a cent a bushel, just as I could go into bankruptcy, but otherwise his wheat must grow. Can anyone stop the wheat? Well, then, no more can I stop the road. Presley regained the street stupefied, his brain in a whirl. This new idea, this new conception dumbfounded him. Somehow he could not deny it. It rang with the clear reverberation of truth. Was no one, then, to blame for the horror at the irrigating ditch? Forces, conditions, laws of supply and demand, were these, then, the enemies, after all? Not enemies. There was no malevolence in nature. Colossal indifference only, a vast trend toward appointed goals. Nature was, then, a gigantic engine, a vast cyclopean power, huge, terrible, a leviathan with a heart of steel, knowing no compunction, no forgiveness, no tolerance. Crushing out the human atom standing in its way with nirvanic calm, the agony of destruction sending never a jar, never the faintest tremor through all that prodigious mechanism of wheels and cogs. He went to his club and ate his supper alone, in gloomy agitation. He was somber, brooding, lost in a dark maze of gloomy reflections. However, just as he was rising from the table, an incident occurred that for the moment roused him and sharply diverted his mind. His table had been placed near a window, and as he was sipping his after-dinner coffee, he happened to glance across the street. His eye was at once caught by the sight of a familiar figure. Was it Minna Hooven? The figure turned the street corner and was lost to sight, but it had been strangely like. On the moment, Presley had risen from his table, and, clapping on his hat, had hurried into the streets, where the lamps were already beginning to shine. But search though he would, Presley could not again come upon the young woman in whom he fancied he had seen the daughter of the unfortunate German. At last he gave up the hunt, and returning to his club, at this hour almost deserted, smoked a few cigarettes, vainly attempted to read from a volume of essays in the library, and at last, nervous, distraught, exhausted, retired to his bed. But none the less, Presley had not been mistaken. The girl whom he had tried to follow had been indeed Minna Hooven. When Minna, a week before this time, had returned to the lodging-house on Castro Street after a day's unsuccessful effort to find employment, and was told that her mother and Hilda had gone, she was struck speechless with surprise and dismay. She had never before been in any town larger than Bonneville, and now knew not which way to turn nor how to account for the disappearance of her mother and little Hilda. That the landlady was on the point of turning them out she understood, but it had been agreed that the family should be allowed to stay yet one more day in the hope that Minna would find work. Of this she reminded the landlady, but this latter at once launched upon her such a torrent of vituperation that the girl was frightened to speechless submission. "Oh," she faltered, I know, I am sorry. I know we owe you money. But where did my mother go? I only want to find her." "Oh, I ain't going to be bothered," shrilled the other. "How do I know?" The truth of the matter was that Mrs. Hooven, afraid to stay in the vicinity of the house after her eviction, and threatened with arrest by the landlady if she persisted in hanging around, had left with the woman a note scrawled on an old blotter to be given to Minna when she returned. This the landlady had lost. To cover her confusion, she affected a vast indignation and a turbulent, irascible demeanor. "I ain't going to be bothered with such cattle as you," she vociferated in Minna's face. "I don't know where your folks is. Me, I only have dealings with honest people. I ain't got a word to say so long as the rent is paid. But when I'm soldiered out of a week's lodging, then I'm done. You get right along now. I don't know you. I ain't going to have my place get a bad name by having any south of Market Street chippies hanging around. You get along, or I'll call an officer." Minna sought the street, her head in a whirl. It was about 5 o'clock. In her pocket was 35 cents, all she had in the world. What now? All at once, the terror of the city, that blind, unreasoned fear that only the outcast knows, swooped upon her and clutched her, vulture-wise, by the throat. Her first few days' experience in the matter of finding employment had taught her just what she might expect from this new world upon which she had been thrown. What was to become of her? What was she to do? Where was she to go? Unanswerable, grim questions, and now she no longer had herself to fear for. Her mother and the baby, little Hilda, both of them equally unable to look after themselves, what was to become of them? Where were they gone? Lost, all of them, herself as well. But she rallied herself as she walked along. The idea of her starving, of her mother and Hilda starving, was out of all reason. Of course it would not come to that. Of course not. It was not thus that starvation came. Something would happen, of course. It would, in time. But meanwhile, how to get through this approaching night and the next few days? That was the thing to think of just now. The suddenness of it all was what most unnerved her. During all the 19 years of her life she had never known what it meant to shift for herself. Her father had always sufficed for the family. He had taken care of her, then all of a sudden her father had been killed, her mother snatched from her. Then all of a sudden there was no help any more. Then all of a sudden a terrible voice demanded of her, "Now just what can you do to keep yourself alive?" Life faced her. She looked the huge stone image squarely in the lustreless eyes. It was nearly twilight. Minna, for the sake of avoiding observation, for it seemed to her that now 1,000 prying glances followed her, assumed a matter-of-fact demeanor and began to walk briskly toward the business quarter of the town. She was dressed neatly enough, in a blue cloth skirt with a blue plush belt, fairly decent shoes, once her mother's, a pink shirtwaist and jacket, and a straw sailor. She was, in an unusual fashion, pretty. Even her troubles had not dimmed the bright light of her pale greenish-blue eyes, nor faded the astonishing redness of her lips, nor hollowed her strangely white face. Her blue-black hair was trim. She carried her well-shaped, well-rounded figure erectly. Even in her distress she observed that men looked keenly at her, and sometimes after her as she went along. But this she noted with a dim subconscious faculty. The real Minna, harassed, terrified, lashed with 1,000 anxieties, kept murmuring under her breath, "What shall I do? What shall I do? Oh, what shall I do now?" After an interminable walk she gained Kearney Street, and held it till the well-lighted, well-kept neighborhood of the shopping district gave place to the vice-crowded saloons and concert halls of the Barbary Coast. She turned aside in avoidance of this, only to plunge into the purlieus of Chinatown, whence only she emerged, panic-stricken and out of breath, after a half-hour of never-to-be-forgotten terrors, and at a time when it had grown quite dark. On the corner of California and DuPont Street she stood a long moment, pondering. "I must do something," she said to herself. "I must do something." She was tired out by now, and the idea occurred to her to enter the Catholic church in whose shadow she stood and sit down and rest. This she did. The evening service was just being concluded. But long after the priests and altar boys had departed from the chancel, Minna still sat in the dim, echoing interior, confronting her desperate situation as best she might. 2 or 3 hours later the sexton woke her. The church was being closed. She must leave. Once more, chilled with the sharp night air, numb with long sitting in the same attitude, still oppressed with drowsiness, confused, frightened, Minna found herself on the pavement. She began to be hungry, and at length, yielding to the demands that every moment grew more imperious, bought and eagerly devoured a 5-cent bag of fruit. Then once more she took up the round of walking. At length, in an obscure street that branched from Kearney Street, near the corner of the plaza, she came upon an illuminated sign bearing the inscription, "Beds for the night, 15 and 25 cents." 15 cents. Could she afford it? It would leave her with only that much more, that much between herself and a state of privation of which she dared not think. And besides, the forbidding look of the building frightened her. It was dark, gloomy, dirty, a place suggestive of obscure crimes and hidden terrors. For 20 minutes or half an hour she hesitated, walking twice and 3 times around the block. At last she made up her mind. Exhaustion, such as she had never known, weighed like lead upon her shoulders and dragged at her heels. She must sleep. She could not walk the streets all night. She entered the doorway under the sign and found her way up a filthy flight of stairs. At the top, a man in a blue-checked jumper was filling a lamp behind a high desk. To him Minna applied. "I should like," she faltered, "to have a room, a bed for the night. One of those for 15 cents will be good enough, I think." "Well, this place is only for men," said the man, looking up from the lamp. "Oh," said Minna, "oh, I didn't know." She looked at him stupidly, and he, with equal stupidity, returned the gaze. Thus, for a long moment, they held each other's eyes. I didn't know," repeated Minna. "Yes, it's for men," repeated the other. She slowly descended the stairs, and once more came out upon the streets. And upon those streets that, as the hours advanced, grew more and more deserted, more and more silent, more and more oppressive with the sense of the bitter hardness of life toward those who have no means of living, Minna Hooven spent the first night of her struggle to keep her head above the ebb tide of the city sea into which she had been plunged. Morning came, and with it renewed hunger. At this time she had found her way uptown again, and toward 10 o'clock was sitting upon a bench in a little park full of nursemaids and children. A group of the maids drew their baby buggies to Minna's bench and sat down, continuing a conversation they had already begun. Minna listened. A friend of one of the maids had suddenly thrown up her position, leaving her, Madame, in what would appear to have been deserved embarrassment. "Oh," said Minna, breaking in, and lying with sudden, unwonted fluency, "I am a nurse girl. I am out of a place. Do you think I could get that one?" The group turned and fixed her, so evidently a country girl, with a supercilious indifference. "Well, you might try," said one of them. "Got good references?" "References?" repeated Minna blankly. She did not know what this meant. "Oh, Mrs. Field ain't the kind to stick about references," spoke up the other. "She's that soft. Why, anybody could work for her." "I'll go there," said Minna. "Have you the address?" It was told to her. "Lauren," she murmured. "Is that out of town?" "Well, it's across the bay." "Across the bay?" You're from the country, ain't you?" "Yes. How do I get there? Is it far?" "Well, you take the ferry at the foot of Market Street, and then the train on the other side. No, it ain't very far. Just ask anyone down there. They'll tell you." It was a chance, but Minna, after walking down to the ferry slips, found that the round trip would cost her 20 cents. If the journey proved fruitless, only a dime would stand between her and the end of everything. But it was a chance, the only one that had as yet presented itself. She made the trip. And upon the street railway cars, upon the ferry boats, on the locomotives and way coaches of the local trains, she was reminded of her father's death, and of the giant power that had reduced her to her present straits by the letters P and SWRR. To her mind they occurred everywhere. She seemed to see them in every direction. She fancied herself surrounded upon every hand by the long arms of the monster. Minute after minute her hunger gnawed at her. She could not keep her mind from it. As she sat on the boat, she found herself curiously scanning the faces of the passengers, wondering how long since such a one had breakfasted, how long before this other one should sit down to lunch. When Minna descended from the train at Lauren on the other side of the bay, she found that the place was one of those suburban towns, not yet become fashionable, such as may be seen beyond the outskirts of any large American city. All along the line of the railroad thereabouts, houses, small villas, contractors' ventures were scattered, the advantages of suburban lots and sites for homes being proclaimed in 7-foot letters upon mammoth billboards close to the right-of-way. Without much trouble, Minna found the house to which she had been directed, a pretty little cottage, set back from the street and shaded by palms, live oaks, and the inevitable eucalyptus. Her heart warmed at the sight of it. Oh, to find a little niche for herself here, a home, a refuge from those horrible city streets, from the rat of famine with its relentless tooth. How she would work, how strenuously she would endeavor to please, how patient of rebuke she would be, how faithful, how conscientious. Nor were her pretensions altogether false. Upon her, while at home, had devolved almost continually the care of the baby Hilda, her little sister. She knew the wants and needs of children. Her heart beating, her breath failing, she rang the bell set squarely in the middle of the front door. The lady of the house herself, an elderly lady with pleasant, kindly face, opened the door. Minna stated her errand. "But I have already engaged a girl," she said. "Oh," murmured Minna, striving with all her might to maintain appearances. "Oh, I thought perhaps—" She turned away. "I'm sorry," said the lady. Then she added, "Would you care to look after so many as 3 children, and help around in lighthouse work between whiles?" "Yes, ma'am." "Because my sister, she lives in North Berkeley, above here, she's looking for a girl. Have you had lots of experience? Got good references?" "Yes, ma'am." "Well, I'll give you the address. She lives up in North Berkeley." She turned back into the house a moment and returned, handing Minna a card. "That's where she lives. Careful not to blot it, child. The ink's wet yet. You had better see her." "Is it far? Could I walk there?" "My, no. You better take the electric cars, about 6 blocks above here." When Minna arrived in North Berkeley, she had no money left. By a cruel mistake, she had taken a car going in the wrong direction, and though her error was rectified easily enough, it had cost her her last 5-cent piece. She was now to try her last hope. Promptly it crumbled away. Like the former, this place had been already filled, and Minna left the door of the house with the certainty that her chance had come to naught, and that now she entered into the last struggle with life, the death struggle, shorn of her last pitiful defense, her last safeguard, her last penny. As she once more resumed her interminable walk, she realized she was weak, faint, and she knew that it was the weakness of complete exhaustion and the faintness of approaching starvation. Was this the end coming on? Terror of death aroused her. I must do something. Oh, anything. I must have something to eat." At this late hour the idea of pawning her little jacket occurred to her, but now she was far away from the city and its pawn shops, and there was no getting back. She walked on. An hour passed.